everyone, welcome to another Random Talk Sunday. I apologize that this video had to be uploaded late. I have been not feeling well lately, and as a result I have had to sleep off my sickness, but luckily that sickness is almost pretty much gone, so I feel a lot better, and now I'll be able to upload all of the videos that need to be uploaded, and that'll be that. And I'll be caught up for all the videos. So without further ado, let me discuss what I wanted to discuss for this random video Sunday that sort of revolves around the holidays, Christmas, fantasy, and things of that nature. And that being the Nutcracker, out of all things. The Nutcracker can't be really classified in the same way as a film, or as just music, or as just a story like in a book. It's sort of a combination of all these things because it is a ballet, and is one of the most famous and well-recognized ballets probably of all time. Next to Tchaikovsky's the Swan Lake, the Nutcracker probably stands probably at a higher level, I'd say, because we've seemed to recognize Nutcrackers as a part of a cultural phenomenon, because you see them pretty much everywhere around this time of year. At least I do. It seems to be a big part of Western culture. It seems to be a huge symbol of Christmas, of the holidays. It's just everywhere, and it's really largely and probably mostly in part due to the Nutcracker, the ballet. Now, I'm going to kind of go through with you as to what exactly the ballet is about, because I know sometimes these ballets can get confusing as to what exactly is going on. Again, similar to when I discussed The Swan Princess, the film that was trying to base itself off of Swan Lake. There's a lot of interesting things going on within this particular ballet that I think really do make it stand out. Even though initially I think it wasn't all that popular, it sort of gained recognition through Tchaikovsky's music, which does really stand out and does provide great context as to what's sort of going on within the play, or within really the ballet, excuse me. But basically, the plot of the ballet revolves around this little girl named Clara. Or I really don't know how old she's supposed to be, but apparently she's just supposed to be a girl. She ends up receiving a Nutcracker from her godfather, of all people, named Drosselmeyer, who is apparently supposed to be a local councilman, magician, and, most importantly, toy maker, which shows you how many jobs this guy's got. But apparently he comes over around Christmas time, and the ballet does a really good job of showcasing the scene of Christmas and really emphasizing that point. And Drosselmeyer ends up giving the children all these different presents, and the present that he gives to Clara is a Nutcracker, whom she grows really fond of. Fritz, her brother, at least from what I could tell from my research, does not like this. He is rather kind of a jealous one, and so he takes the Nutcracker from her, starts playing with it, and then eventually ends up sort of breaking it, sort of on purpose, I guess you could say. You know, kids being kids. Basically, she is not too happy about this, Clara, and she ends up, though, falling asleep with the Nutcracker sort of in her arms, broken up. this results in going into a dream sequence, which pretty much takes up the majority of the ballet. Um, I think again the plot, I think at least from the ballet, I think it really does really establish to you when you watch it what's really going on. But I think it gets a little bit harder to understand once Act 2 comes up. But basically, once she's in her dream sequence, we see, the Mouse King, and he ends up being the foe of the Nutcracker. And Clara tries to end up helping the Nutcracker, and the Nutcracker ends up succeeding. And they sort of go off together to have an adventure after the defeat of the Mouse King. That's pretty much the ending of Act 1. And it's fairly straightforward from how the ballet presents itself, what's really going on. Even though there's no words or anything, you can kind of clearly see the picture. But within the second act, this is where it kind of starts to get a little odd. It might be difficult for people to really know what's going on. But apparently, the way this play is presented, it's supposed to be something for children. It's supposed to emphasize a child's fantasy. So basically what ends up happening is the Nutcracker turns into sort of a prince, I guess you could say, as a part of the play or ballet. Which I think he reveals himself actually within Act 1. But once he's the prince, that's when they go off in their adventure. That's really when Act 1 starts. And it gets sort of confusing because it might be hard to tell from the costumes as to exactly what certain things represent. But basically, the way the ballet was intended to be structured was basically where the prince / Nutcracker and Clara go off to is a candy world, a fantasy land sort of for children. And it's supposed to be like a snow forest, and the snow forest sort of has a kind of childlike feel by bringing out various things that we would associate more with candy and with treats that children have an appeal for. So that's really what it kind of tries to do. It's not as adult as it sounds. It's kind of strange because the first act is kind of adult, especially when you have a fight sequence. And then going from a fight sequence to Happy Candyland is kind of odd, but that's really how the ballet structures itself. And basically, this is where they come across what we call the Sugar Plum Fairy. And the Sugar Plum Fairy has her own, like, cool little sequences that she does with dancing and things like that. And, they really get into this sort of candy world that they end up going to. And basically, that's where we see all of the sort of dance sequences that end up occurring in Act 2. They really revolve around this candy world and those that inhabit it. And then that's ultimately where really the play ends, because once the prince and / Nutcracker and Clara leave the candy world, she pretty much wakes up and the Nutcracker is right next to her, and that's pretty much the ending of the ballet. So really, in a nutshell, it's kind of like a fairy tale, sort of similar to Swan Lake. It's a very it has a lot of magical elements within it, and like very childlike ideas. But at the same time, it kind of puts a dose of reality in there by making it a dream sequence. And it's really interesting how this play or this ballet approaches itself, because on the one hand it has some interesting concepts, and then on the other hand it's fairly simple in the sense of being, just a ballet for really children, and for their sort of um, understanding of this kind of holiday season. And I think the Nutcracker is something that usually children are sort of introduced to at a young age, especially when you see it everywhere. Um, and again, a Nutcracker really does what it says it does. It does crack nuts. Um, but yeah, it's an interesting interpretation of a story. Um, it's one of those things where you kind of take it for what it is. And I think for the most part, from the various ballets that has been done over the years, I think the story still holds up in that it really ultimately represents the holiday Christmas, I think, fairly well. And it sort of makes things less traumatic, I guess you could say, that something like something like Swan Lake, and less and uh, and less about cruel drama as opposed to uplifting, um, fun, childlike wonder, which is really what ultimately is the kind of message within the ballet. You see the struggle of the first act, and then the second act, it's all just one happy-go-lucky ride and a good time. That's kind of what it goes for, as opposed to Swan Lake, that kind of tries to be fairly dramatic and maybe over the top in some ways. But I guess you could say too, the Nutcracker is a little bit crazy by incorporating things that have to do with candy and stuff. But that kind of makes sense, um, in associating with the holiday of Christmas, because again, that's kind of what children and what a lot of people think about when it comes to that holiday. So again, it does play into the holiday well, I think, and that's why it stood out over the years. Is it as maybe interesting as it was when you watched it as a kid? Probably not. I mean, yes, it's not as deep. Yes, there's not a whole lot um, that it's really saying, really. Like, there's not a whole lot of messages or ideas, it's not very it's not like a full blown out story like Swan Lake, where you do feel like there's a beginning, middle, and end. It just kind of cruises. There's just one conflict and that's it. And really that's really ultimately the kind of feeling it wants to represent. And I think that's what Tchaikovsky wanted to provide for this ballet and for sort of this holiday. It's supposed to be an uplifting holiday. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be um, it's supposed to have this this joy to it, and this celebratory aspect to it. So I think that's why some people may find it not as engaging, because again, it doesn't have really a huge amount of plot going on, especially when the whole second act is really there's no plot. It's just, yay, we're in Candyland, woo, we're having fun in Candyland, and yay. There's not really a whole lot going on. And again, there's not a whole lot to the play, but I think, again, the kinds of emotions that it's sort of bringing out, I think, really work. Again, like a lot of fairy tales, they're not really all that complicated. Are all, or not necessarily complicated, but they're not. And again, they're not really that complicated, but they're not as in depth. But at the same time, they do really well in relaying emotions, and that's what the Nutcracker was going for, and I think that's why it works. Again, it's similar to why Cinderella works. Why does it work? Well, because it knows what it's going for. It's going for fantasy. It's not going for reality. And this is what this story offers to the table. It's a fantasy. It's having fun. It's experiencing something that you probably can't experience in real life. and that's okay. You know, sometimes we do have fantasy moments, you know, or wish we could do things that, you know, were not within the realms of reality. But that's okay because that's what a fantasy is. Uh, so again, that's why these things. That's why I want to emphasize that point. And I think why some people might criticize this as uh, being associated with not being as, again, as developed or as in depth. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be just this journey, and that's it. And you could take it for what it's worth. That's really all that you need to. That's really all that really you need to really take out of the play. And what I think Tchaikovsky was trying to do with it, and what the choreographers were going for. So that's really the heart of the Nutcracker, and the the Nutcracker as an image has stayed with us since probably the founding of this play, um, and I think has stayed within the consciousness of people. And I think it only makes sense to talk about something um, that has been such a huge part of Christmas and of the holiday and of kind of the joy surrounding it and the kind of fantasy element of it. So yeah, I think that's really ultimately though all I can really say about the Nutcracker in particular. It pretty much explains it for itself, at least within the first act. Again, the second act might get confusing as to what represents what. Um, but yeah, that's really what it was going for. And if you're interested in those kinds of fantasy oriented uh, kinds of uh, art, this is definitely an art that is worthy of praise and of sort of celebration and of looking into. But ultimately, I think that's really all I can say. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I'll try get started trying to upload Mondays and Tuesdays videos, so we'll be all cut up and there'll be no more worries. But until next time, everybody, bye bye.